Picture walking into a house your great-grandfather built. The floors creak beneath your feet, the windows rattle when the wind blows, and you can practically feel the cold seeping through the walls in winter. Now imagine walking into a brand new home fresh off the construction line. Everything gleams, the temperature stays perfectly controlled, and not a sound penetrates from outside. Which house do you think will still be standing in 50 years? If you guessed the old one, you're absolutely right, and the reason why should terrify anyone who owns a modern home. We're living through what I call the disposable home epidemic. For the first time in human history, we're building houses designed to fail right around the time you finish paying your mortgage. This isn't an accident or poor craftsmanship. It's a systematic shift in how we think about housing that's happening everywhere, from suburban Texas to new developments in London to housing estates in Sydney. Today, I'm going to expose the 3 fundamental reasons why modern homes are literally rotting from the inside out, and why this global housing crisis might be far worse than anyone realizes. Let's start with what I call the Great Lumber Deception. Walk into any house being framed today and take a deep breath. That smell, it's pine and industrial adhesive. But if you could step back in time to a 1920s construction site, you'd smell something completely different. You'd smell an actual forest. Here's the science behind this difference that builders don't want you to understand. Every piece of lumber in that 1920s house came from trees that were likely 100 to 200 years old. These giants grew slowly in dense forests, fighting for every ray of sunlight that filtered through the canopy. This brutal competition created what we call tight growth rings, sometimes 20 rings packed into a single inch of wood. That timber was dense, heavy, and naturally loaded with protective resins that made it resistant to rot, mold, and termites. Fast forward to today's lumber yards, and you're looking at trees that were harvested after just 20 or 30 years of growth. Modern forestry treats trees like corn crops, blasting them with fertilizer and harvesting them the moment they reach minimum size. Look at a modern 2x4, and you might see only 3 or 4 giant growth rings spanning the entire width. This wood is soft, spongy, and filled with sap that mold absolutely loves to feed on. We used to build with timber that was essentially stone. Now we're building with what amounts to compressed cardboard. But the lumber fraud goes even deeper than weak wood. It's not just about what the tree was like when it was alive. It's about what happens to that wood after it's cut. Traditional lumber was air-dried for months or even years, allowing the natural resins to concentrate and the wood to stabilize. Modern lumber is kiln-dried in a matter of days, leaving it structurally unstable and prone to warping, splitting, and moisture absorption. The frame of your house is literally the skeleton that everything else depends on. When that skeleton is made from fast-growth, artificially dried wood that's more similar to a sponge than a stone, every other system in your home becomes compromised. But believe it or not, the frame isn't even the worst part of this story. The real crime against durability is what we wrap around that weak frame. Historically, builders covered houses with thick, solid wood planks, or later with genuine plywood. Real plywood is made from thin layers of actual wood glued together with the grain running in alternating directions. When plywood gets wet, it swells, but when it dries out, it returns to its original shape and maintains its structural integrity. Today, almost every new home in America, Canada, the UK, Australia, and across Europe is wrapped in something called OSB, or Oriented Strand Board. This material has become the global standard for modern housing construction, and it represents one of the most catastrophic downgrades in building materials in human history. OSB looks exactly like what it is: wood chips that have been ground up and vomited back together under heat and pressure with industrial adhesive. The marketing departments call it engineered wood, but that's like calling a hot dog engineered beef. It's wood scraps held together with glue, and it has a fatal flaw that makes it completely unsuitable for structural applications. When OSB gets wet, the edges swell and they never, ever shrink back to their original size. Builders have a technical term for this phenomenon. They call it telegraphing, which sounds almost quaint until you understand what it means. What it really means is that your house's structural sheathing is turning into oatmeal. Once OSB loses its structural integrity from even a single leak, it stays compromised forever. And yet, this is the material we're using to hold up roofs and support walls in millions of homes around the world. Think about this for a moment. The exterior shell of your house, the thing that's supposed to protect everything inside from the elements. is made from compressed sawdust that becomes permanently damaged the first time it gets wet. In a world where every house will eventually experience some kind of moisture intrusion, we're building with a material that has a one-strike failure policy. Now let's step inside these modern homes and examine what I consider the biggest marketing scam in contemporary real estate: luxury vinyl plank flooring, or LVP. The psychological manipulation here is absolutely masterful. Manufacturers market this material as waterproof, scratch-proof, and virtually indestructible. They slap the word luxury on the packaging so you feel sophisticated about paying $4 per square foot for what is essentially printed plastic. Because that's exactly what LVP is. It's a photograph of wood grain printed on vinyl and glued to a plastic backing. This is the definition of a disposable material masquerading as a permanent improvement. A solid oak floor can last a century because when it gets worn or damaged, you can sand it down and refinish it 5 or 6 times throughout its lifetime. When your luxury vinyl plank gets a deep scratch or starts peeling after 10 years, there's no repair option. You rip it all out and send it directly to the landfill. Consider this statistic that should horrify anyone who cares about environmental sustainability. Every 1,000 square feet of LVP flooring you install is roughly equivalent to disposing of 27,000 plastic bottles throughout your living space. We are literally paving our homes with future landfill waste and calling it an upgrade. Even the circulatory system of modern homes has been cheapened beyond recognition. Traditional plumbing used copper pipes, which are naturally antimicrobial, rigid, and proven to last 50 to 70 years with minimal maintenance. The new standard is PEX, a flexible plastic tubing that builders love because it's fast to install. You can snake it through walls like an extension cord, cutting installation time in half. But while PEX doesn't corrode like old steel pipes, it has 2 critical weaknesses that copper never had. First, rodents can chew through PEX in seconds to access the water inside. They simply cannot chew through copper. Second, we're seeing emerging research about microplastics and chemical leaching in PEX systems, especially when water sits stagnant in the lines. We've essentially traded a sterile, permanent metal for a petroleum-based product just to save on labor costs during installation. Then there are the windows, which I think of as the eyes of your home. Traditional homes used wood sash windows that could be maintained indefinitely. If the wood frame rotted, you patched it with epoxy. If it got scratched or worn, you sanded it smooth and applied fresh paint. These windows were genuinely serviceable forever with basic maintenance skills. Modern homes use vinyl windows, which are made from extruded plastic. Here's the problem with plastic that has an expiration date built into its molecular structure. Sure, if a sealed glass unit fails, you can sometimes pay to have just the glass replaced, but the frame itself is a ticking time bomb. Vinyl becomes brittle in cold weather and warps in extreme heat. Once a vinyl window frame cracks or the internal plastic mechanisms break, it's game over. You can't sand plastic, you can't patch it like wood, and you usually have to rip the entire window unit out of the wall and buy a completely new one. It's essentially a subscription model for your home's windows. And when you multiply this across every system in the house, you start to see the bigger picture. We're not building houses anymore. We're building consumer products with planned obsolescence built into every component. But inferior materials are only half of this disposable housing story. The other half is how we assemble these materials, and this is where things get truly dangerous. Modern construction has fundamentally changed the physics of how houses interact with moisture, and the results are catastrophic. I call this the plastic bag effect. Old houses were notoriously leaky and drafty. They were expensive to heat and impossible to keep at a consistent temperature, but they had a secret superpower that we've completely eliminated from modern construction. When water inevitably got into the walls, and water always finds a way into walls, the constant airflow would eventually dry it out. These houses could breathe. New homes are built for energy efficiency ratings, not longevity. We wrap them in house wrap, we tape every seam, we seal every penetration, and we caulk every gap. We've turned our houses into giant Ziploc bags. When moisture gets inside these sealed environments, whether from an actual leak or just from normal condensation from cooking and breathing, it has nowhere to go. It sits against that weak, fast-growth lumber and that compromised OSB sheathing, creating the perfect environment for mold and rot to flourish. The architecture itself makes this problem even worse. Modern design loves floor-to-ceiling glass walls and clean, minimalist lines. But for some inexplicable reason, contemporary architects have declared war on roof overhangs and eaves. In a traditional home, the roof acts like an umbrella, pushing water away from the walls and foundation. In a modern rectangular box design, there is no umbrella. When it rains, water runs straight down the face of the building, testing every window seal and every construction joint. Remember, those are vinyl window seals that are designed to fail within 15 years. We're essentially designing homes that require absolutely perfect maintenance just to survive normal weather, and we're building them with materials that can't be maintained. Before you get angry at builders for being greedy or incompetent, you need to understand that there's actually a logical economic reason this disposable housing trend is happening. To understand it, we need to look at Japan, where they've been building disposable houses intentionally for decades. In Japan, a house is treated as a depreciating asset, just like a car. It's expected to become essentially worthless within about 30 years due to strict earthquake building codes and cultural preferences for new construction. Japanese homes are routinely demolished and rebuilt every generation, and this is considered normal and economically rational. Here's the terrifying part. The Western world is accidentally adopting this Japanese model without admitting it to ourselves. We're building 30-year houses but selling and pricing them as forever homes. This disconnect is driven by what I call the HGTV effect. As buyers, we've completely stopped caring about the structural integrity of houses. Instead, we obsess over superficial aesthetics. Potential buyers will pass on a house with a slate roof that could last a century because the kitchen cabinets look dated, but those same buyers will overpay for a house made from compressed sawdust and plastic sheeting because it has a waterfall kitchen island and wide plank vinyl floors. Builders are simply responding to market demand. We buy based on appearance, so they allocate their budgets accordingly. They spend money on quartz countertops and stainless steel appliances while cutting costs on flashing, proper framing, and moisture management systems that you can't see in the listing photos. This creates a vicious cycle where the market rewards short-term thinking and punishes long-term durability. A builder who spends extra money on quality materials and proper construction techniques can't compete on price with a builder who cuts corners on everything behind the drywall. The market has trained us to buy houses the same way we buy cars, focusing on features and finishes rather than fundamental engineering. So are we doomed to live in rotting cardboard boxes? Is there any hope for durable housing in the modern world? Actually, yes, and ironically, the future of quality construction looks a lot like the past, just with some technological upgrades. First, let me tell you about CLT, or cross-laminated timber. Remember how I explained that modern wood is structurally weak? CLT completely solves this problem through engineering rather than chemistry. Manufacturers take layers of that fast-growth lumber and glue them together in alternating directions under massive pressure, creating wood panels that are literally as strong as steel and concrete. CLT doesn't warp, it doesn't twist, and believe it or not, it's incredibly fire-resistant because the outer layer chars and protects the interior. This technology allows us to build genuinely permanent homes using modern trees. Several high-end builders are already using CLT for custom homes, and the results are remarkable. If you don't trust any wood products at all after learning about the lumber industry, there's another option that's gaining popularity among quality-focused builders. Light-gauge steel framing has been standard in commercial construction for decades because it simply works better than wood. Steel studs are perfectly straight, they don't warp, they don't rot, and termites literally break their teeth trying to chew through them. The catch with steel framing is thermal conductivity. Steel conducts temperature very efficiently, which means your walls will be freezing cold in winter unless you insulate them correctly. The solution is continuous exterior insulation, essentially wrapping your entire house in a thermal blanket that keeps the steel framework at room temperature while keeping moisture out of the wall cavity. Now, I know some of you are thinking about 3D printed homes as the future of durable construction. You need to be very careful here. Yes, printing a house out of concrete sounds incredibly durable, but ask yourself this critical question. How do you fix a leak in a traditional wood or steel home? If a pipe bursts inside a wall, you cut through the drywall, fix the pipe, and patch the hole. It's straightforward maintenance. In a 3D printed concrete home, the plumbing is often embedded directly inside the concrete layers during printing. You can't just cut a neat hole when something goes wrong, you need a jackhammer. What happens if you want to add an electrical outlet or move a wall during a future renovation? You simply can't. We might accidentally be building permanent homes that are actually more disposable than traditional construction because they're impossible to modify or repair. For windows, the industry is slowly moving away from cheap vinyl toward fiberglass and composite materials. Unlike vinyl, which expands and contracts at different rates than glass and eventually breaks its own seals, fiberglass expands at exactly the same rate as the glass it holds. This means the seals stay intact, giving you windows that last 50 years instead of 15. These solutions exist today, but they require builders and buyers to prioritize long-term value over short-term savings. Quality materials and proper construction techniques cost more upfront, but they're dramatically cheaper over the lifetime of the house when you factor in maintenance, replacement, and energy costs. So if you're in the market for a home today, what should you actually do? You basically have two choices, and both require you to think differently than most buyers. Choice A: buy the 100-year-old house. Accept that it will have drafts, the floors will creak, the closet space will be inadequate by modern standards, and you'll spend more on heating and cooling. But understand that you're buying a house built from materials that were designed to last centuries, constructed with techniques that have been proven over generations. Choice B: buy a new house, but buy it with extreme skepticism. Ignore the granite countertops and stainless steel appliances completely. Instead, look at the roof eaves. Are they deep enough to keep water off the walls? Examine the window materials. Are they cheap vinyl that will fail in 15 years? Or quality fiberglass that might last 50? Look at the exterior materials. Is the siding real wood, fiber cement, or plastic vinyl? Check what type of plumbing was installed. Is it copper that will last decades, or PEX that might need replacement in 20 years? Most importantly, research the builder's reputation for quality, not just their marketing materials. Talk to people who bought houses from that builder 5 or 10 years ago. How are those houses holding up? Are the owners dealing with moisture problems, window failures, or structural issues? The harsh reality is that we can't change the global economy overnight, but we can stop rewarding builders for selling us disposable products disguised as permanent homes. Every time we choose a house based on cosmetic features instead of structural quality, we're voting for the continued degradation of housing standards. A home should be shelter first and an investment vehicle second. If we continue building and buying disposable houses, we're going to wake up in 20 years with a housing stock that's literally worthless. Entire neighborhoods of houses built in the 2020s will be uninhabitable by the 2040s, creating a housing crisis unlike anything we've seen before. The disposable home epidemic isn't just about building materials or construction techniques. It's about a fundamental shift in how we think about permanence, quality, and our relationship with the built environment. For thousands of years, humans built structures intended to outlast their builders. We created homes that would shelter multiple generations, that would improve with age, that would become more valuable over time. Somewhere along the way, we decided that houses should be like cars or smartphones, designed to become obsolete and need replacement every few decades. This mindset has infected everything from individual material choices to government building codes to financing structures that favor new construction over renovation and maintenance. The consequences extend far beyond individual homeowners. When houses are disposable, communities become disposable. Neighborhoods lose their character and continuity when homes are routinely demolished and replaced. The environmental impact of constantly rebuilding instead of maintaining is staggering when you consider the embodied energy in all those materials that get sent to landfills. There's also a social justice component to this issue that doesn't get discussed enough. Wealthy buyers can afford to research builders, specify quality materials, and hire inspectors who know what to look for. They can choose to buy older homes in established neighborhoods where quality was still standard. But first-time buyers and families with limited budgets are increasingly forced into the disposable housing market, where their largest investment is almost guaranteed to deteriorate rapidly. The good news is that awareness of this problem is growing among both builders and buyers. A new generation of construction professionals is rediscovering traditional building techniques and combining them with modern technology. Consumers are starting to ask harder questions about the homes they're buying. Building scientists are developing better methods for designing durable, maintainable houses that can last centuries. But change is happening slowly, and in the meantime, millions of families are unknowingly buying homes that are designed to fail. The disposable home epidemic represents one of the largest transfers of wealth from consumers to corporations in modern history, disguised as homeownership and the American dream. Understanding this issue is the first step toward making better choices as consumers and demanding better practices from the construction industry. Every time you choose quality over convenience, durability over aesthetics, and long-term value over short-term savings, you're helping to shift the market back toward building homes that are actually worthy of being called permanent shelter. The houses our great-grandparents built are still standing because they were constructed with the assumption that they needed to last forever. Maybe it's time we started building with that same assumption again, because the alternative is a future where homeownership becomes just another form of planned obsolescence, and the places we call home become as disposable as everything else in our throwaway economy.